This podcast contains discussions on sexual misconduct. Topics such as sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment may be discussed. Listener discretion is advised. In this episode, I speak to Tarana Burke. She is an activist, a community organizer, and the founder of the #MeToo movement.
I don't need to maintain the momentum in the media, right? I need to maintain the momentum amongst the people. Movements are made of people. And so because of the way society works now, because of the only thing that we care about is what's right in front of our face and what's right on the news that night, is why our movements aren't sustained.
This is the #NoExcuse podcast, discussing the challenges and complexities and potential solutions in preventing and responding to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in the aid sector, through interviews with victims and survivors, experts, aid workers, artists, and leaders. The podcast is produced by the World Health Organization's Department for the Prevention and Response to Sexual Misconduct. I am Guni Dias, your host and global focal point for the department. I'm your host, Guni, and today I'm honored to welcome a truly iconic voice in the prevention and response to sexual misconduct, Tarana Burke. She's an activist, a community organizer, and the founder of the MeToo movement, and an advocate who has inspired millions to take action and speak their truth. Tarana, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
I think it's safe to say that the phrase Me Too has become a globally rallying cry for survivors of sexual violence. But for those who might not know and who are living under a rock, tell us more about the full story. Can you take us back to where it all began? How did the Me Too movement start, and what was the vision that inspired you to create it?
Well, for the part that people don't know is the Me Too movement originally started in 2006. I was working in a community in the U.S., in the state of Alabama. I worked with young Black girls in the community, Black and brown girls in the community. And it was a real particular noticing that I had of how much sexual violence these girls encountered. A lot of them were sharing it and were disclosing and talking about it in our, youth meetings and things. And it was alarming to me. It was alarming to me as a survivor, as somebody who had survived child sexual abuse and sexual violence as an adult, that we would have this many children, literal children. I mean, these are 11, 12, 13-year-old girls who were facing this issue. And because I was an organizer and very active in the community, the fact that there wasn't a community response to it. There wasn't an outcry. There was nobody talking about it, I thought deserved a community response. And so Me Too grew out of that need to create a community response to it. What happened eventually was that, the dawn of social media, and it was right at that same time I created a MySpace page, essentially, which is, for those who don't know, was like one of the early social media platforms. And so we started the MySpace page, as a way to sort of just say, this is what we're doing. It was cheaper and easier than doing a website. And what happened is people started, adults, because remember, we started this with young girls, adult women started reaching out and saying, hey, me too, how can I join? What can I do? Can you bring this to my community? And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, why didn't I make that connection, right? I'm an adult survivor. The other two women who were helping me do the work, they were both adult survivors. We didn't have anything for ourselves, and we were there trying to build something for children. Of course, adult women needed this. And so that changed things. And we decided it's like, I have to expand this. And then I left Alabama and moved to Philadelphia. And I think the work really took off there. It was like I was able to go work inside of schools and then with programs and continue working with some adults. And so, just trying to get people to understand the both working specifically with the young people on what healing resources they needed. At the same time, on a larger scale, trying to have these larger conversations about why there was so much sexual violence in our community, right? And it was difficult because prior to us having the big moment, right, when Me Too went viral, most people did not want to have open public conversations about sexual violence, as rampant as it is. And so I chugged along doing that very difficult work of trying to get people to pay attention, to resource it, what have you, for several years. And then in 2017, following several incidents, right? There was the Cosby trial and Cosby being outed as a sexual predator. That was maybe 2 years before, a year, like 2015, 2016, those years leading up to it, I think was like tilling the soil leading up to the viral moment. There was Roger Ailes at Fox News and that big case. Like, there was all these big cases. The Weinstein story comes out. So many of these famous actresses come forward and start telling their stories. They did that prior to Me Too going viral. But then Alyssa Milano, the actress, but somebody got to her a note that said this thing, and she just posted it. If all the women who have been affected by sexual violence or something like that, or sexual harassment, said Me Too, it would show the magnitude of this issue. Yeah. And so it goes viral.
And just for people to know, you were named Person of the Year by Times Magazine in 2017. Mm-hmm. So I think what you were able to create with the movement is amazing. Reflecting back on everything that happened since then, what would you say you're the most proud of when it comes to the movement?
I think I'm most proud to be able sort of walk through and find their way through disclosure. I think that we grossly underestimate how difficult it is to tell people what happened to you. And the offering that Me Too has is that it can be the start of your story or the entire story, right? It gives language to survivors that they didn't have before, or that was always available, but we hadn't put to use in that way, that says, I don't have to say much more, right? Because the other part about what we do to people who survive sexual violence is, if we do hear their stories, we want all the gory details, right? We want people to cut and bleed for us and pour out every emotion just so we can try to give them a modicum of sympathy for what they've went through, and just so we can maybe try to understand this issue some more. And that's just false. You don't need to know the gross details of the worst thing that ever happened to me to understand how deeply traumatizing it is. People understand trauma. They understand pain in very clear ways. And so what Me Too does is it allows you to you can hold your story and give them the pieces that you want. If somebody else is sharing and I just want to say Me Too, that's all I have to say. If I want to say Me Too and this is what happened, then I have the right to do that too. But it offers some agency in how we administer our stories or don't. And I'm proud of that.
Your movement didn't happen in isolation. You mentioned the actress but who were your key allies in bringing Me Too to life?
Oh, that's such a great question. In the early days before Me Too went viral, I had friends in my community, right? People who I worked shoulder to shoulder with. One of my best friends in the world was one of the first person. I remember very clearly sending her an email, this like moment that I was having. And I got up in the middle of the night, feverishly writing all of this stuff down about what I wanted the movement to look like. And she and I worked shoulder to shoulder to we would go into schools with the kids. And then another one who's like a little sister to me, she came up through my program and then worked inside of the program. And in those early days when we were going to see the kids, it was the three of us doing that work. Later, I would say it's all of the teachers and administrators and people like that who said yes, right? It was very difficult to get a yes. in those days. It was very difficult to get people. There would be a church program or a community program, and I'd say, hey, I'd like to come and talk about this work I'm doing. And they're like, ooh, nobody want to talk about that? No. And then after Me Too went viral, I was called to do it on immediately, right? I was on national television within 3 days of Me Too going viral. A team formed around me, and other women who work on a national level who have been doing this work as well and have helped me navigate that transition from working in a community or working in just a particular city or region to scaling your work up to be national and then international. I work very closely with Fatima Gosgraves at the National Women's Law Center, Ijen Poo at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Monica Ramirez at Justice for Migrant Women. And, just always willing to pick up the phone, always willing to answer. And then, there's a misconception about the women in Hollywood trying to take the movement away. What I actually experienced right after Me Too went viral and in the subsequent years, these last 7 years, a lot of those women who, these actresses and people in the entertainment industry who want this movement to succeed. Many of them, some donated, some lent their time, and just all kinds of different ways. Politicians, a Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley very rarely says no. She's been such an ally. She's a survivor herself, and she's been such an ally to our work over the years. Nobody's asking to be highlighted. Nobody's asking for, they're just like, what is it that you need? Let's make it happen. I really deeply appreciate that.
They were able to amplify it, right? Amplify the voices and the message.
Yeah. But the biggest driver of this movement, honestly, over the last 8 years has been survivors. Mm-hmm. It's like everyday people without famous names who have lifted up, who've talked about it, who've, put the hashtag online. It was people who put the hashtag online, right? Mm-hmm. Like the survivors are the ones who won't let this die, who say we need it, we have it now, and we're going to sustain it. And so that's really why we exist. It's because the survivors who want us here.
So that comes to my next question with regards to sustaining the momentum. Mm-hmm. How do you go about it, especially when, the public's attention is, in 2017, the public's attention was really high up there, and the attention shifts to other things, other issues.
Of course.
How did you go about that?
Well, I think this is the mistake that people make in understanding movements. I don't need to maintain the momentum in the media, right? I need to maintain the momentum amongst the people. Movements are made of people. And so because of the way society works now, because the only thing that we care about is what's right in front of our face and what's right on the news that night, is why our movements aren't sustained. If you don't care about the rampant sexual violence happening every single day in your community, unless you see somebody talking about it on television, you're not the right person to move this work forward anyway, right? And so the work that I do is about sustaining a movement that of people who care about it, who get what's happening, who understand, who can take those numbers. My job is to take that data that people hear all the time and translate that into something that they understand how it's affecting their lives. It's to go into the communities and talk to people, to show people where sexual violence lives inside of these other issues that are important to them, right? People care about politics and elections. Well, if you're a survivor and you care about politics and elections, or if you care about ending sexual violence and you care about politics and elections, you have to bring those two things together, right? When Black women are the second largest group of survivors in the United States, that's a racial justice issue, right? When Indigenous women are the largest group of survivors in the United States, that's a racial justice issue, right? And so our work, what the momentum looks like in between the headlines, is the gritty, unpopular, unglamorous work of movement building. And that's what we do. That's what I do, because they define success the moment the hashtag went viral, the moment it was on television and red carpets and magazine covers. I define success by the hundreds of little girls whose lives were affected between 2006 and 2017, right? So it's about perspective. And I submit that we have to shift our perspective on what we see as successful, what we see as progress, what we see as momentum. We have to just continue what we're doing so that we're organized enough. So when the next moment comes, we can continue to take advantage of what that moment means and help bring more people into the movement.
How do you manage to keep the organization alive when potentially funds are not coming in? Because you know how when it's really the limelight comes with potentially more funding. And so how do you make sure that you can sustain yourself also financially when it's not as popular?
It is the most difficult thing, especially because people think popularity comes with money. Or money comes with popularity. And so I've had funders, foundations who have said to me, don't we fund you, or didn't we give you money? And I'm like, no, they know me, they know my name, and they see me on a cover of a magazine or sitting next to a celebrity, and they think, oh, well, they should be fine, right? That is not true. This is the least funded. First of all, there's a study that came out just about funding for women, period, not for sexual violence, right? And it was something like 1%, less than 1% of all giving goes toward women. Now, inside of that less than 1%, less than 0 point something percent goes to sexual and gender-based violence. So it's already just an unbelievably small amount of resources that are put into the work of ending and disrupting sexual violence. And we get so little of that. And it's even worse because people don't see where sexual and gender-based violence live in other issues. So when they give money towards gun violence, we don't get that either. There was data that came out. The United States has more mass shootings than any other country in the world. 66% of mass shooters have a history of sexual and gender-based violence. How are those issues not married? Climate change. There's an issue of sexual and gender-based violence and climate change because you have a lot of migrant people who are moving, who are being forced to move because of the change in climate. And in that transition, they are being, the women in particular, are experiencing violence, right? So we are steadily losing the little resources that we already have. So, it's very scary and concerning.
So let's talk about your next chapter. How do we continue this movement in a ways that nurtures the movement? So can you tell us a bit more about the UN Women ACT program?
Well, yes. Me Too International, first of all, is the organization that is the container for the Me Too movement. That's our organization. And we have, a very particular sort of mandate around organizing and thought leadership and global engagement and what we call digital direct service. That is going to continue. We will continue organizing globally. We will continue organizing across the United States. UN Women has started a new initiative called UN ACT. And so this initiative is specifically about taking action. And it was why I was so excited to join them, because there have been tons of initiatives that have come out of the UN and UN Women. And other organizations and NGOs who had been a part of those have said, listen, we want something that is very specifically about how we can act together. We want to pull an agenda together that's about moving this needle forward. It's building a shared global agenda around sexual and gender-based violence, which is what we kind of need. We need more strategy and more alliances that cross particular lines that haven't been crossed before. And so what ACT is looking to do is to bring people together at the same place who may not have traditionally been in the same rooms, talk to each other, worked across certain lines, and to see what we can do. Similar to our global network in Me Too, the Me Too Global Network's underlying value is what can we do together that we can't do apart, right?
Oh, that's fantastic. Are there any organizations or initiatives that you think we should be paying attention to? One thing that, WHO is trying to explore is to collaborate with civil society organizations. And from what you're explaining to me with what Me Too International does, is that you all are partnering with civil society organization across the globe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about how you get in touch with them. What are the requirements?
Sure. After Me Too went viral, people started coming from everywhere across the world saying, how can we get started? I want to start my own Me Too. I want to bring Me Too here. And more than that, this is an opportunity for people who are doing like community level, organically brought together. And so how do we get them capacity building also, right? So that they can have access to more resources and get in the rooms they need to get into and have the conversation they need to have. So we started talking to Global Fund for Women, and they helped us to sort of find and get the word out to these organizations that we were looking. We did a survey where nearly 400 and something people responded and said, yes, we want this. We need this kind of building. We need this kind of cross-cultural learning and things like that. Our organization, we say, is grounded in Black principles around integrity, around collective care. We work with organizations like us that put survivors first, that centers the wants of survivors, and also that are led by or believe in survivor leadership, right? So that's how our network is built globally. And I quote my good friend Joanne Smith, the founder of Girls for Gender Equity in New York, because she says, we come to the work because we are the work. And knowing that, we are also an organization, and our networks are also grounded in these principles of healing. We believe in individual and community healing. And that means that everything we do takes into an account that this person could be a survivor. We don't even have to ask, but you could be. And it may not be sexual violence, but everybody's surviving something. So our approach to the work is always, some people use trauma-informed, and that is definitely true, and we incorporate that. But I think it's healing-led, Trauma-informed is good. You should be have the information of how to interact with people who have experienced trauma. But healing led means we want people to not to feel more traumatized by the work. We don't want them to feel like, like they're being re-triggered by anything that's happening. Talk about what they need. Have a space to release. And being a human rights defender in any way is so difficult, and it's not gratifying often, and very few people understand it. And so we also make space for that in our network.
One of the most inspiring things about Me Too, it has influenced organizations, policymakers, and it has encouraged a lot of people to take actionable steps. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what do you think is missing in terms of systems and organizations?
Yeah, I think that the approach to that is always like prescriptive, and it's not, there's no like prescription for it. I think that when we talk about what's needed, we have to talk about it from a place of how do we build interventions that are happening at the same time. And I think that's often why this question gets muddled, right? Because we need legislation, we need culture. Mm-hmm. No, we need it all.
Right.
We need legal interventions. We need medical interventions. We need research interventions. We need cultural interventions. We need resource interventions. And we need all of those things to be happening simultaneously. No one of those is a silver bullet that's going to solve this problem. That's why a movement is necessary, because it takes a full strategy to be happening at the same time. And everybody holds different parts. So I think what's missing is the resources to drive that strategy forward. The people exist, the will exists, the money is not there to do it. And then I think beyond the money is the understanding that it's not This is sort of not like a clinical exercise. This is also about reaching everyday people. Sometimes in movement spaces, we tend to talk to each other. You know, we write these papers and nobody will read because you would have to be, where would you even find it? We hold these conferences that everyday people don't come to because how do they know about them? How do we create narrative interventions for everyday people to understand that life is not supposed to be this way? You deserve dignity. You deserve respect. You deserve autonomy, right? Like, how do you get those messages into the mainstream?
One thing that I'm very hopeful in what we are currently doing is that signifies that we are moving, is that people who are listening to this podcast are actually mostly men. We have 83% of listeners that are actually men. What would you tell them?
I think the thing that I always say to men first is that Me Too is not a woman's movement. It's a survivor's movement, which means that you are welcome. And that I think generally what I say to people is that this is engaging men as only perpetrators and harm doers is a mistake. I think one of the biggest missteps we've made is the only time we talk to men about sexual violence is to scold them about not doing it. The only time we talk to men about violence against women is to tell them how toxic they are. And so that is not a winning formula, right? One, there's so little acknowledgement of men who experience sexual violence, and we are closing up any available space they have to get what we have, right? But I'd like to say to men, like, this is not a gender war. This is a war for humanity, because this experience is one of the most dehumanizing in the world. And when we talk about sexual violence, we should be thinking about dignity and humanity, not men against women.
I'm eager to know, what is it inside of you that makes you keep on going regardless of what's going on? Because there must be something really special for you to keep on going.
You know, I wrote this in my memoir that I think I was just born hardwired to fight injustice. I was born hardwired to fight injustice. I wished to stop many times. I spoke to these young people the other day for Martin Luther King Day here in America. And I said, when somebody asked a similar question, I said, I quit all the time. I quit maybe every quarter. I'd write a resignation letter, and then I just come back. It's just, I don't try to pretend. I'm not a superhero, so I can't even pretend if I wanted to. This is very hard work. It is hard to stay hopeful sometimes, but I surround myself with people who tap in when I tap out. And I try to keep a deep, long memory of victory. And I count every single moment from my own life and from the lives of people around me. And it makes me like, okay, maybe I don't quit today. Maybe I'll come back for like 6 more months. But I tell people all the time, to say, how do I stay in? What do I do? I say, don't. If you want to tap out, tap out. Your heart will bring you back. The movement doesn't need people who are weary and tired and fed up and hopeless. Go feed yourself. In fact, that's still movement work. If you are a person who is grounded in this, who loves this, who believes in justice, who wants to see a better world, and you feel hopeless and down and torn apart, go feed yourself. Don't drag yourself to the march. Don't force yourself. Don't do that. Take the break that your body and your mind and your spirit is telling you to take. And when you feel renewed, you will come back to exactly where your heart brings you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tarana, because that is the message I think that a lot of us who are trying to work in this, because we're always thinking, are we doing enough for the victims? Are we doing enough to change the system? Yeah. And being able to pause and to come back, I think that's a beautiful message. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us to prseah@who.int. Until the next time, goodbye.